Welcome, curious minds, to AI History of Western Philosophy. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey back to ancient Greece, but with a conceptual twist that's anything but ancient. Before we really dive in, though, just a quick but important note. This is AI-generated content, and specifically this podcast confabulates presenting ideas as fact. Though our subject is philosophy, we are not philosophers. Our mission here at AI History of Western Philosophy, well, beyond pointing to the original sources, is really to experiment with philosophy as material and, generate new possibilities for thought. So yeah, hold on to your epistemic hats. Now, what we're about to do today is it's pretty audacious, actually. We're taking a fresh, you could even say radical, look at Protagoras of Edera, the 5th century BCE Greek sophist. He's a figure often sort of relegated to the role of, well, the villain in Plato's famous dialogues. But what is our whole understanding of him has been fundamentally skewed, shaped by his most brilliant opponent. We're going to attempt something truly groundbreaking here, applying the incredibly sophisticated philosophical framework of a late 20th century American philosopher, Robert Brandom, to the very fragmented ideas of this ancient sophist. I know what you might be thinking, isn't that just a huge anachronism? Viewing the past through a lens that would have been completely alien to its subject seems like, well, kind of a cardinal sin in historical scholarship, right?
It's an excellent point, yeah, and a completely valid concern, absolutely. However, what we're undertaking here isn't really a historical claim about Protagoras' subjective intentions or, exactly what he wrote down word for word. Given how little direct evidence we actually have, that would be largely impossible, frankly.
We barely have fragments.
Exactly. So instead, this is more an exercise in what philosophers call rational reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to build the most philosophically powerful and internally coherent position that can be articulated from his surviving tenets. And we're using Brandom's systematic philosophy as our, let's say, conceptual scaffolding.
Okay, so it's not history in the strict sense. It's philosophical building.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it less like digging up an artifact exactly as it was buried, and more like taking Protagoras' core ideas, translating them into the manners as well as the language of the age we live in, as Brandom puts it, and seeing what profound insights emerge. We're basically turning that potential anachronism into a unique opportunity for fresh, maybe even unexpected understanding.
And the central thesis that comes out of this reconstruction is, well, it sounds truly groundbreaking. Protagoras' most famous statement, the homo mensura thesis, of all things the measure is man, of the things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not, is, you're arguing, traditionally misunderstood, massively misunderstood. Most of us, probably thanks to Plato, hear this and immediately think, radical individualist subjectivism.
That's it.
The whole my truth is my truth idea, making any kind of shared objective truth impossible. Is that pretty much the common interpretation?
Absolutely. That's the standard narrative, etched into the history of philosophy for centuries. Plato famously depicted Protagoras as the ultimate relativist, whose philosophy, if you took it seriously, would lead to just intellectual chaos and, well, moral nihilism. And for centuries, this reading has been the dominant one, no question.
But this new interpretation, it posits something far more profound, something that reframes not just Protagoras, but maybe even the whole trajectory of Western thought.
That's the argument, yes. We see the homo mensura statement not as relativism, but as a foundational, maybe embryonic expression of a social pragmatist and inferentialist theory of meaning, truth, and reason. It suggests Protagoras wasn't denying reality, not at all, but radically rethinking where meaning and truth actually come from, where they reside.
Okay, so if we're going to build this new Protagoras, we definitely need to redefine some key terms in his famous saying. Let's start with man anthropos. How does the reconstruction interpret that?
Right, this is crucial. The Greek term Protagoras actually used is the generic anthropos, meaning man or humankind. It's not hekastos anthropos, which would explicitly mean each man or every individual man.
Ah, okay. So it's not necessarily individual man.
Exactly. This linguistic choice, it opens the door for a truly transformative interpretation. In our Brandomian reading, man isn't the isolated individual, locked in their private perceptions. Instead, it refers to the community of discursive practitioners, humankind, in its collective linguistic capacity. It's the body of all the people engaged in reason-giving.
We're community.
Yes. So it's not about what I privately believe, but what we collectively constitute through our shared practices. This immediately pulls Protagoras away from that solitary subjectivism and puts him right into the communal arena.
And measure metron. That's usually taken to mean something passive, like sensing or just experiencing something, right?
That's the traditional passive reading, yeah.
Yeah.
Plato really leaned into that one. But Metron can also imply a much more active normative practice. It can mean to assess or to evaluate, a standard against which claims are judged.
Like a measuring stick, but for arguments.
Sort of, yeah. So measure isn't just a passive capacity for private sensation, but the active public norm instituting social practice that Brandom calls deontic scorekeeping. It's the ongoing process of holding each other accountable for claims and reasons. What's really fascinating here is how, through this lens, Protagoras emerges not as this self-refuting relativist, but as a distant ancestor to the whole anti-representationalist tradition in philosophy.
Like Wittgenstein, Sellers.
Exactly. Figures like Wittgenstein, Sellers, culminating in Brandom himself. It's just Protagoras was pointing towards a practice-based theory of meaning centuries before anyone else was really talking about it that way.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge shift. And the metaphilosophical implications of this rereading are, well, they sound enormous. It fundamentally challenges the standard history of philosophy, doesn't it? The story usually goes, sophists cause this skeptical crisis, then Plato comes along with his objective idealism and, saves the day. It's the classic winners writing history scenario.
It really is. Brandom's philosophy is often seen as the peak of a distinctly modern, post-analytic pragmatist turn, a shift away from that representationalist paradigm that's dominated Western thought since Plato. By showing this deep structural similarity, this homology between Protagoras and Brandom, we're suggesting that this pragmatist turn isn't some recent invention. It's more like the recovery of a philosophical path not taken.
So the crisis Plato responded to.
Right? Maybe it wasn't just the threat of nihilism. Maybe it was actually the birth of a really sophisticated practice-based theory of meaning and reason. One, that his own representationalist framework, with its focus on those mind-independent forms, just couldn't fully grasp or accommodate.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Wow.
the entire history of the philosophy of language could be reframed. It becomes this long-running, maybe often hidden dispute between two fundamental paradigms.
That's the idea.
On one side, you've got the Platonic view. Meaning and truth are anchored in some mind-independent reality, maybe accessible through pure reason.
Right.
And on the other, the Protagorean view, meaning and truth, are located squarely in the normative structure of human social practice.
Exactly. Our exploration today will try to trace this really fascinating dispute. To fully appreciate this radical reinterpretation, though, our path has to first take us pretty deep into Brandom's groundbreaking ideas. We need to understand his concepts of norms, inference, social objectivity. Once we have that conceptual toolkit, firmly in hand, we'll then return to Protagoras, seeing his ancient words with hopefully entirely new eyes, and crucially, we'll use Brandom's framework to defend him against Plato's most famous critiques. Then finally, we'll explore how this new Protagoras offers some surprising, maybe even profound relevance for modern thought, and interestingly, even for the foundations of democracy itself.
Okay, so to truly understand our reconstructed Protagoras, we first need to get a really firm grasp of the conceptual blueprint that makes this whole rereading possible. Robert Brandom's philosophy. His work, as you said, provides this comprehensive approach to language, mind, knowledge, all built on the fundamental primacy of the social and the normative. He completely reshapes how we understand meaning, right? So that seems like the place to start.
Absolutely. For millennia, the dominant tradition in Western philosophy, stretching all the way from Plato's theory of forms up to modern correspondence theories of truth, has been what we call representationalist. This view holds the main job of language and thought is to represent, or picture, or refer to some non-linguistic reality out there.
Like words or labels for things.
Pretty much. Words get their meaning by standing for objects or properties or concepts in the world, and the truth of a sentence is about its accurate correspondence to how things actually are. Think of language like a map or maybe a photograph of the world.
Trying to match reality.
Right. Our words are trying to perfectly match up with what's actually out there independent of us.
But Brandom, you're saying, proposes a radical inversion of this. He flips that entire model on its head. How does he rethink meaning? What's the core of his inferentialist semantics?
He really does flip it. And here's where it gets truly interesting and I think incredibly powerful. Brandom argues for what he calls inferentialist semantics. In this view, meaning isn't primarily about what a concept refers to in isolation. Instead, meaning is determined by its role in a web of inferences.
Okay, so not what it points to, but what it does.
Exactly. What it does within our reasoning. What other claims does it commit us to? What claims entitle us to use it? It's about its connections, its logical relationships. And this isn't just some linguistic tweak. This is the core insight that we argue lets us unlock Protagoras. It shows he wasn't necessarily denying objective reality, but maybe rethinking where meaning and truth actually reside in our shared practices, not just in some detached representation.
Can you give us a concrete example? Like, how does this work for a simple concept we all use?
Sure, let's take the concept red.
Yeah.
Now, to truly grasp red, Brandom would argue, isn't primarily about having a vivid mental image of redness or even just being able to consistently pick out red things when you see them, though that's part of it, of course.
So it's more than just pointing.
Yes. It's more about knowing what follows from something being red. For instance, knowing that if something is red, then it's necessarily colored. Or knowing that it cannot simultaneously be green all over. These are inferential consequences. And it's also about knowing what would entitle someone to apply the concept red in the first place. Maybe seeing it looks a certain way in good light, or perhaps a reliable witness told you it was red.
So knowing the rules around using the word red.
Precisely. The meaning of red is constituted by these inferential relations, the proprieties of reasoning, the rules, if you like, that govern its use. Think of it like understanding a piece in chess. You understand what a knight means, not just by pointing at it, but by knowing how it moves, what it threatens, what follows from its position.
Okay, so it sounds like understanding any single concept requires understanding a whole network of others. It's holistic.
Exactly. It's inherently holistic. You can't really grasp a single concept in total isolation because to grasp any concept is to grasp its place within this vast network of other concepts and their inferential connections. This also shifts the fundamental unit of meaning. We often think of individual words as the basic carriers of meaning, but for Brandom, the minimal unit that can actually serve as a premise or a conclusion in an inference, the basic move in reasoning is the judgment. A complete assertion.
Not just red, but that apple is red.
Right. So our focus moves from isolated words to the claims we actually make. And this fundamentally changes how we think about understanding and knowledge. It becomes less about trying to perfectly match our thoughts to some external reality.
And more about skillfully connecting ideas and claims in a coherent, reasoned way within a community.
That's it. It's about navigating the inferential landscape.
Now, if meaning is all about this inferential role, how concepts relate to each other in reasoning, then using language isn't just about describing stuff. It's fundamentally a rational practice. And Brandom has this famous, almost playful way of characterizing this practice, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He calls it the game of giving and asking for reasons, or the go-gar for short. This game is what he argues fundamentally distinguishes us humans as sapient, meaning concept-mongering, rational beings from merely sentient creatures.
Sentient meaning, aware, responsive.
Right. Creatures capable of awareness and response, but not of conceptual thought or the complex shared reasoning that defines us. A dog, for instance, can react to the command sit, sure, but it doesn't then offer reasons why it's sat or challenge your command. It doesn't engage in the go-gar.
So what does it actually mean to be a player in this game? What's involved in playing the go-gar?
Well, to be a participant in a linguistic community, to truly engage in communication, means being able to do several key things. First, you have to be able to make claims, make assertions. And crucially, you have to take responsibility for those claims by being prepared to provide reasons for them if you're appropriately challenged.
So if I say the economy is improving, I should be ready to back that up.
Exactly. You're implicitly committing to being able to explain why you believe that.
Yeah.
Maybe by citing job numbers or GDP growth or whatever. It's also about being able to challenge the claims of others, asking, why do you say that? And also being able to assess the reasons they provide. This whole model embodies what Brandom calls a normative pragmatics. It explains the meaning of linguistic expressions in terms of their use in these deeply norm-governed social practices.
So the essence of language isn't just painting pictures.
Right. It's engaging in this structured social activity of justification and accountability. And rationality itself gets redefined here. It's not some abstract internal capacity for calculation in your head. It's a practical social skill, the ability to play the go-jar effectively.
That makes you think about everyday conversations differently, doesn't it? How often are we implicitly playing this game, giving reasons, asking for them, even without consciously thinking, now I am playing the go-gar?
All the time. It's the very fabric of our rational interactions.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. But how do we keep track of all these claims and reasons? It sounds incredibly complex. There isn't like a rule book we carry around, right?
Yeah.
What's the underlying engine making this GOGAR actually work?
Right. It's not governed by explicit formal rules like chess, at least not consciously for the most part. It's managed by the implicit practical know-how of the participants. Brandom models this practical competence using the metaphor of deontic scorekeeping.
Deontic scorekeeping. Okay, break that down.
Yeah, it sounds a bit technical, but the idea is pretty intuitive. Essentially, speakers and listeners are constantly, and usually without explicit thought, tracking the normative statuses of their fellow interlocutors.
Normative status.
Yeah, think of it like points in a game, but for responsibility and justification. It's like how a skilled chess player implicitly tracks the positions and threats of all the pieces on the board without reciting the rules for each one.
Okay, so what are these fundamental normative statuses that we're tracking in this scorekeeping?
There are two main ones, fundamentally: commitment and entitlement. When a speaker makes an assertion, which is the basic move in the GOGAR, they undertake a doxastic commitment to the content of that assertion.
Doxastic meaning related to belief.
Exactly. They commit themselves to the belief expressed. This means they are now responsible for it. They're obliged to defend it with reasons if appropriately challenged. If I claim that new sci-fi movie is fantastic, I'm committed to that. You might reasonably expect me to explain why I think it's fantastic, if you ask.
Okay, that's commitment. What's entitlement?
An entitlement is, roughly speaking, a justification for a commitment. It's having the right to hold that belief or make that claim. You can be entitled to a commitment in several ways. You could infer it from other commitments you already hold and are entitled to. It's fantastic because it won 5 awards and award-winning films are usually good. You could be entitled through reliable perception. It's raining because I see the drops hitting the window. Or you could defer to the testimony of another reliable speaker. The doctor said I need to rest, so I'm entitled to believe I should rest.
So it's like keeping score of who believes what and whether they have good reason to believe it.
That's a good way to put it. Think of it like building a case in court, maybe. You're constantly implicitly weighing who is committed to what and whether they have the proper evidence or justification, the entitlement to back it up.
So the real meaning of a speech act in practice isn't just the words themselves, but how it changes this deontic score between us, how it shifts those commitments and entitlements.
Precisely. The pragmatic significance, the meaning and practice of any speech act, is the difference it makes to this deontic score that participants implicitly keep on one another. We take a very simple example again. Someone asserts, the cat is on the mat. A scorekeeper who accepts that assertion attributes that commitment to the speaker. Okay, they believe the cat is on the mat, but the scorekeeper also tracks whether the speaker is entitled to that commitment. Did they see it? Did someone reliable tell them? And they also track what further commitments logically follow from it, like there is a mammal on the mat, or something is covering part of the mat. The speaker is implicitly committed to those two, even if they don't say them.
Wow. So the scorekeeping is the engine underneath it all.
It's the underlying dynamic mechanism that institutes the inferential norms, the rules of reasoning, which, in turn, constitute the conceptual content of the expressions we use. It's how we establish and maintain shared meaning. This explains how our language use isn't just about swapping information like data packets. It's about navigating this incredibly complex, shared landscape of responsibilities, justifications, and implications. We're constantly building and adjusting this intricate web of mutual understanding through our interactions.
This all sounds incredibly social, which, okay, brings us back to that critical question, the one Plato hammered Protagoras on. If meaning and norms are entirely social, doesn't this just collapse into relativism? Or maybe mere conventionalism? How do we maintain any sense of objectivity? How is it not just anything goes if a community simply decides, this is how we talk?
That is absolutely the million-dollar question for any philosophy that grounds meaning and norms in social practice. And Brandom's answer to this is, I think, one of his most innovative contributions, and it's absolutely key to defending Protagoras from that charge. For Brandom, objectivity isn't about correspondence to some practice-independent reality, some view from nowhere. Rather, objectivity is a structural feature of the social-perspectival nature of deontic scorekeeping itself. It actually emerges from our interactions.
Oh, okay.
And this immediately offers a powerful way to understand how Protagoras could talk about man as the measure without necessarily falling into that trap of subjective relativism. The measure can be objective precisely because it is intersubjective, built into the structure of our shared practice.
How does this structural feature work then? What's the key distinction that allows objectivity to emerge from something so social, so dependent on perspective?
It arises from a crucial distinction that each scorekeeper must make, usually implicitly, just to participate in the game. Every scorekeeper distinguishes between two things. First, the commitments another person acknowledges what they explicitly say they believe or are committed to. And second, the commitments that person is, from the scorekeeper's perspective, actually committed to by virtue of the public, inferential norms of the language they share.
Can you give an example of that distinction?
Sure. Let's say someone asserts, this shape here is a square. Okay, they've acknowledged that commitment. But by the rules of geometry and our shared concepts, if it's a square, they are also committed to this shape is a rectangle, whether they explicitly acknowledge that second commitment or not. It follows inferentially. The scorekeeper tracking their claims holds them accountable for both the explicit assertion, it's a square, and its implied inferential consequences, it's a rectangle, even if the speaker isn't aware of or doesn't mention the second part.
Ah, I see. So there's always potentially a gap between what someone thinks or says they're committed to and what the shared rules of the game, the public norms, actually commit them to. It's not just about what's inside their head at that moment.
Exactly right. This creates a necessary and indeed a crucial gap between the subjective attitudes of an individual, what they think they're committed to, and their objective normative status, what they are committed to, by virtue of these public inferential norms of the language. This model of objectivity is founded not on an I-we relationship of simple community consensus, which, could seem arbitrary. Instead, it's founded on an I-thou relationship of mutual recognition and accountability.
I-thou?
Meaning the binding source of normativity, the ought, lies precisely in the practice of holding each other responsible. When I make a claim, I implicitly grant you and others the authority to assess my entitlement to it and to hold me accountable for its inferential consequences. This very act of subjecting my own performances to the assessment of another's perspective is the practical institution of a norm that transcends my own subjective state. It creates a standard outside of just me. So objectivity isn't some pre-existing thing out there that we discover. Exactly. This raises an important question, or rather, provides an answer. Objectivity isn't some entity we find outside of human practice. It's an ongoing dynamic status that we achieve and sustain through the social practice of giving and asking for reasons. It offers a really powerful alternative to the common understanding of objectivity, grounding it firmly in robust interaction rather than some detached external truth. It means that while our knowledge is always human, always perspectival, it's not therefore arbitrary or merely subjective.
Okay, armed with Brandom's powerful framework inferentialism, the Gogar, deontic scorekeeping, and this idea of social objectivity, let's now circle back to Protagoras himself. This is where the ancient and the modern really collide, isn't it? Allowing us to reinterpret his famous dictum, man is the measure, in this radically new and, frankly, quite liberating light.
Indeed. The traditional interpretation of homo mensura has, for just too long, hinged on those two critical assumptions we talked about. First, that man means the isolated individual, and second, that measure implies a passive act of private perception. Our Brandomian reconstruction challenges both of these head-on, clearing the path for a truly pragmatist translation.
Let's re-examine that word man, anthropos, again. Why is the generic nature of the word so absolutely crucial here?
It's fundamental. As we discussed, Protagoras used the generic anthropos for man, or humankind. Not a phrase like hekastos anthropos, which would explicitly specify each man or every individual. This isn't just some minor linguistic detail. It's a semantic opening that allows for this profound reinterpretation. It permits us to understand man not as the isolated individual subject trapped in their own head, but as the collective humankind in its fundamental capacity as a linguistic norm-instituting community.
So man becomes the whole team of players in the Gogar.
Essentially, yes. The body of all deontic scorekeepers, the entire community, engaged in the game of giving and asking for reasons. This shifts the focus immediately. It's not about my unique internal experience being the measure, but about the shared public space of reasons that we collectively inhabit and actively create.
And measure, metron. Plato really seized on that one, linking it directly to subjective sensation, making it seem passive. But you're saying it has a much more active dynamic meaning inherent in the Greek.
Exactly. While metron can certainly mean a physical ruler or, yes, a passive capacity for sensing, it also carries this powerful connotation of an active, normative practice of assessing or evaluating. It's the standard against which claims are judged, the benchmark for correctness in our discourse. And in the Brandomian reading, this standard, this measure, is nothing other than the game of giving and asking for reasons itself. The community's shared implicit inferential norms, the ongoing dynamic process of deontic scorekeeping are the true measure of conceptual correctness, what counts as being or not being in our conceptual scheme.
And the things, chromata, that man is the measure of, we shouldn't think of those as just like rocks and trees existing independently.
Right. The term chromata isn't just referring to brute, unconceptualized objects existing entirely apart from human understanding or concern. In ancient Greek, it often refers much more broadly to matters of concern, affairs, the subject matter of discourse, basically, the very conceptual content of our judgments about the world. So Protagoras' statement is really about how we conceptually structure and understand the world through our language and our shared practices.
Okay, this is genuinely a radical retranslation. So can you give us the full, the dramatic reveal, the retranslated thesis of Protagoras, filtered through this Brandomian lens?
Okay, the radical retranslation, which I think truly captures the essence of this reconstruction, would sound something like this. The community of discursive practitioners is the source of the norms that determine the conceptual content of all things, of those that they are, and of those that are not, that they are not. See how different that feels. It transforms the statement completely from individual subjectivism, a kind of everyone for themselves philosophy, into a foundational claim of normative pragmatism. It argues that the standards determining what is and what is not, conceptually speaking, are not some external pre-given absolutes floating out there. They are instituted by and implicit in our shared social practices of reason-giving.
So it's not just wordplay, it's a complete flip of philosophical perspective. It makes what we take to be true or real a kind of communal achievement, dynamically shaped and sustained by our interactions and our agreements on how to use concepts.
Precisely. Truth becomes something we build together through the game.
Okay, if Protagoras isn't a relativist in this reading, then what about his historical role as a sophist? He was famous for teaching practical skills, teaching rhetoric, teaching people how to argue effectively. What was he really teaching, if not just how to win arguments regardless of truth?
This rereading offers I think, a beautiful and coherent explanation for Protagoras' actual educational project. He famously claimed not to teach specialized subjects like geometry or astronomy, right? He taught the craft of politics, technotigna, essentially the art of making people into good, effective citizens.
Okay, but what does that mean in the Brandomian framework?
Within this framework, teaching politicotechna isn't about imparting a fixed body of factual knowledge. Instead, it's about cultivating a practical mastery of the go-getter. A virtuous or effective citizen, from this perspective, is someone who can skillfully navigate the complex web of commitments and entitlements that constitute public deliberation and social life. It's a fundamental civic skill, essential for any functioning community, especially a democracy. They learn not just to speak, but to speak responsibly and effectively within that shared space of reasons.
Okay, this brings us right to Protagoras' most notorious claim, that he could teach how to make the weaker argument appear the better or stronger. Now, traditionally, this is seen as the smoking gun, right? Proof that he was teaching deceit, trickery, manipulation. It's what gave the sophists such a bad name. But here's where it gets really interesting. How does the Brandomian perspective reinterpret this claim, moving it away from just being about trickery?
Right. In a Platonic representationalist world where truth is about matching reality, that claim absolutely sounds like teaching deceit or rhetorical sleight of hand. How can you make something false appear true? But in a Brandomian inferentialist world, where truth is about entitlement within the game, that same claim describes a core rational skill. It describes the very essence of persuasive argumentation and justification.
How so? What makes an argument weaker in this game?
An argument is weaker if it is not currently entitled within the deontic score of the interlocutors, meaning it lacks sufficient acknowledged justification at that moment in the conversation or debate.
Okay, so it's not yet justified according to the shared score.
Exactly. It can be made stronger, not by trickery, but by making explicit the implicit inferential connections that can, in fact, serve as its justification. This involves articulating and endorsing premises that the audience already accepts or can be persuaded to accept, from which the desired conclusion logically follows. By doing this, you change its normative status in the game. You provide the entitlement it previously lacked.
Can you give an example, like a lawyer?
Yeah, think of a lawyer, maybe. They take an argument that initially seems flimsy. My client couldn't have done it. That's the weaker argument initially. They make it stronger by bringing in overlooked evidence, entitling premises like, here's an alibi witness, or by articulating new inferential connections. If the timeline was X and the alibi is Y, then my client couldn't have been there. This raises an important question. Is that trickery? Or is it the very essence of rational persuasion and justification? The Brandomian view says it's the latter.
So the sophist, as a master of the game,
Teaches his students how to be effective producers and consumers of reasons, not just in terms of raw facts, but in terms of understanding and skillfully manipulating the logical and inferential relationships between ideas to achieve rational agreement, consensus, and ultimately effective action.
wow, that completely reframes the sophists. They go from being deceptive rhetoricians to crucial educators in rational civic engagement and effective public discourse.
That's the potential of this reconstruction. Yeah.
That's a profound reevaluation. Now, Plato's Socrates, in the Theaetetus dialogue, made an interesting observation that seems to give Protagoras a kind of out from pure relativism. He noted that while Protagoras holds that whatever seems true is true for a person,
Right, the perception point.
he also doesn't claim all states are equally good. A wise person, like a doctor changing sickness to health, can change a bad state to a good one, making good things appear to them. This sounds like a really crucial distinction between simple truth and something more like usefulness, benefit.
It is absolutely crucial for the Brandomian Protagoras, and it's a point often glossed over in the traditional critiques focusing just on the truth part. It allows us to clearly differentiate between mere truth, in the sense of subjective seeming or even entitled commitment on the one hand, and utility, goodness or pragmatic value on the other. In our Brandomian model, the truth of a claim, as we said, is fundamentally a matter of its status within a particular scorekeeper set of commitments specifically, whether it's an entitled commitment within the Gogar. However, the utility or goodness of a whole set of commitments, how well those beliefs actually serve a purpose for the individual or the community, that's a different evaluation entirely. So how do we evaluate what's better or worse if in some sense every belief is true for the person who holds it, or entitled from their perspective? Well, a set of beliefs or commitments can be evaluated pragmatically. We can assess it based on its internal coherence, does it contain contradictions, and also based on its success in guiding action effectively in the world. For instance, if you hold the belief system that includes jumping off cliffs is a great way to fly, that might be internally consistent in some bizarre way and true for you, in the sense you acknowledge the commitment. But it's clearly a worse belief system in terms of its practical utility for survival compared to one that includes gravity exists and jumping off cliffs is dangerous.
Okay, so better means more functional, more coherent.
Exactly. A better set of commitments is one that is more stable, less prone to internal contradiction, and more conducive to achieving one's goals and, well, flourishing, both individually and collectively. And this gives us a new way to understand the role of the wise person, the sophist. They aren't revealing some absolute hidden truth. They're acting more like a kind of conceptual therapist.
A conceptual therapist, I like that.
Yeah. They help individuals and even whole cities to critically examine and revise their existing webs of commitments. The goal isn't necessarily to get closer to some external reality, but to arrive at more useful, more harmonious, and more practically successful configurations of beliefs and intentions.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sophist's job isn't about aligning beliefs with an external absolute reality, like Plato wanted. It's about improving the internal functioning of a belief system for greater coherence, stability, and practical effectiveness in navigating the world.
Precisely. This gives the sophist a really valuable, almost therapeutic or engineering role in shaping functional thought and effective action, not just teaching people how to win arguments for the sake of winning.
Okay, let's turn to Plato's critiques of Protagoras, particularly in the Theaetetus. These are widely considered, just devastating. For centuries, they've basically been seen as the definitive refutation of sophistic thought, or at least Protagoras' version of it. Plato seemed to corner Protagoras into self-refutation, leaving him looking philosophically bankrupt. But now, with our Brandomian framework firmly in hand, these classic objections can be systematically diffused. Let's start with the most famous one, the paratropy, or the table-turning argument.
Yes, the paratropy is usually presented as the absolute knockout blow, the final word. Plato's argument against Protagoras basically goes like this. Step 1. Protagoras' main thesis, let's call it P, states that every belief is true for the person who holds it, or something very close to that.
Now, Plato points out many people believe that Protagoras' thesis P is actually false. Let's call this opposing belief Q.
According to Protagoras' own thesis, P, if his opponents believe Q, then Protagoras must admit that Q is true for them.
Plato then triumphantly concludes that Protagoras has, by his own logic, been forced to concede that his own thesis, P, is false, at least for some people, and maybe therefore just false.
It appears to be a perfectly self-refuting argument, a neat logical dead end for Protagoras.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly airtight when you lay it out like that, a brilliant logical trap. So how on earth does the Brandomian Protagoras possibly escape this? Where did Plato go wrong exactly from this new perspective?
The flaw in Plato's argument, from a Brandomian perspective, is precisely his failure to consistently maintain the social-perspectival nature of the claim he's attacking. He subtly shifts from the scorekeeping perspective back to a more traditional, absolute truth-functional logic where it doesn't apply cleanly. Here's the first key point. When an opponent asserts Q, Protagoras' thesis is false, Protagoras, as a competent deontic scorekeeper, attributes the commitment to Q to his opponent.
Okay, he notes it down on their scorecard, so to speak.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here, and absolutely crucial, is that attributing a commitment to someone else is not the same as undertaking or endorsing that commitment oneself. Protagoras is not forced to believe Q himself.
He doesn't have to put it on his own scorecard.
Precisely. He simply acknowledges that his opponent holds that belief, and that from their perspective, based on their other commitments and entitlements as he tracks them, they might be entitled to it. It's like a judge acknowledging that a lawyer has presented a certain argument in court. The judge isn't necessarily agreeing with the argument, just recognizing it as a move that has been made in the legal game.
So it's not a concession on Protagoras' part at all. It's just an acknowledgement of another player's move in the game of reasons.
Exactly. What Plato presents as self-refutation is actually just ordinary disagreement. It's a situation where two scorekeepers have incompatible commitments on their scorecards. This isn't the end of rational discourse, it's the starting point.
Right, disagreement happens all the time.
The resolution isn't found in some simple logical deduction from a supposed universal truth that Protagoras must accept. The resolution lies in making further moves within the go jar. Protagoras can challenge the opponent for their reasons for holding Q. He can offer robust justifications for his own thesis, P. He can try to persuade them to revise their score by presenting a more coherent and compelling overall picture. Plato's argument only seems to work because he implicitly, and perhaps strategically, drops the crucial for them relativizing clause that belongs to Protagoras' actual reconstructed thesis. He then assumes this neutral view from nowhere from which the competing claims, P and Q, must be adjudicated on absolute terms.
But the Brandomian Protagoras denies that such a viewpoint even exists.
Correct. He denies that detached vantage point. There are only the various interacting perspectives of the scorekeepers engaged in the game. So the paratropy argument fails because it ultimately begs the question. It presupposes the very representationalist view from nowhere framework, the idea of absolute truth, independent of perspective, that Protagoras on this reading fundamentally rejects.
Wow. Okay, that really does expose how an argument can be subtly undermined by imposing an inappropriate framework. It challenges that whole idea of a universal truth existing outside of human practice and perspective.
It really does.
That's a truly powerful diffusing of the paratropy. But Plato had another major objection, didn't he? If everyone is their own measure of truth, in whatever sense, then surely no one can really be wiser or more knowledgeable than anyone else. This would make Protagoras' profession as a highly paid teacher of wisdom, a sophist, seem like a kind of fraud. If all opinions are equally true or entitled from the speaker's perspective, then what's the point of paying someone like Protagoras to teach you? How does he reclaim expertise and wisdom in this system?
This objection, too, I think, crumbles under the weight of the Brandomian reconstruction. Because, again, it rests on a fundamentally mistaken Platonic definition of what wisdom is. The Brandomian rebuttal is to fundamentally redefine wisdom itself, moving it away from Plato's conception. Wisdom, in this pragmatist view, is not privileged epistemic access to some transcendent realm of objective, absolute truth. It's not about having a direct mental line to the forms.
Okay, so what is it then?
Rather, wisdom is defined as a superior practical mastery of the inferential norms that constitute the gogar. It's about being really, really good at playing the game.
Ah, okay. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the wise person, the expert, isn't someone who sees a truer reality than everyone else. They're more like a chess grandmaster.
That's a perfect analogy. The grandmaster doesn't know a truer version of chess. There isn't some ideal form of chess they've apprehended through pure thought. Instead, they have a vastly superior understanding and practical mastery of the game's actual rules and their incredibly intricate consequences. They know how pieces move, how strategies unfold, what moves are entitled given the current board state, what positions are strong or weak, and what lines of play are likely to lead to a better outcome, like checkmate, or in philosophy, perhaps coherence or practical success.
So what specifically makes a Protagorean expert a sophist wiser in this Godar context? What concrete skills do they possess that justify their role as teachers and their fees?
Well, such an expert, the master scorekeeper, possesses a far more comprehensive grasp of the inferential consequences of any given commitment or assertion. They can see the ripple effects of accepting a particular claim much further down the line than a novice player. They're also much more adept at identifying hidden incompatibilities between a person's or a city's various commitments. They can spot subtle contradictions or tensions in a belief system that the holder might miss.
Like finding the logical weak spots.
Exactly. They're also highly skilled at articulating the implicit reasons that can serve to entitle previously unjustified claims, making a coherent case where one wasn't obvious before. That's the making the weaker argument stronger skill, used constructively. And critically, they can more effectively guide others in the difficult process of revising their commitments to achieve a more coherent, more stable, and more pragmatically successful overall set of beliefs and intentions. Think of a skilled negotiator or mediator, perhaps.
Okay, so this raises an important question, or rather, reframes the answer. Protagoras isn't selling access to the truth with a capital T. He's selling expertise in the practice of rationality itself.
That's the core idea. His fee is justified by his superior ability to help his students become more effective, more articulate, and more responsible players in the game of giving and asking for reasons, a skill absolutely essential for success, especially in the demanding democratic life of the ancient Greek polis.
It elevates the sophist's role again, doesn't it? From a controversial charlatan to an essential guide in navigating complex social and intellectual terrain.
It potentially does, yes.
Now, another key strategic move by Socrates in the Theaetetus was to link Protagoras' homo mensura thesis directly to the idea that knowledge is perception, and even further, to a Heraclitean ontology of radical flux, where everything is constantly changing and nothing truly is. This connection made Protagoras seem incredibly vulnerable to obvious objections about non-perceptual forms of knowledge like memory, mathematics, abstract concepts like justice. If knowledge is just fleeting perception, how can we know anything stable? Was Protagoras really saying knowledge is just what we perceive with our senses at any given moment?
This, I would argue, was a brilliant, strategic, and ultimately highly effective misreading of the Protagorean position by Plato. A very clever strawman. The Brandomian Protagoras, as we've reconstructed him, is making a claim primarily about judgment, about the undertaking of a doxastic commitment, making a claim about the world, not about raw, unconceptualized, private perception and isolation.
So Plato shifts the focus from the claim to the raw sensation.
Exactly. He reduces Protagoras' more nuanced claim about the measure of things, as conceptually articulated in judgments, to a simplistic claim about mere sensation, which is much easier to attack.
So perception still plays a role in the Brandomian system, presumably. It's not irrelevant, but it's not the whole story, or even the most important part.
Precisely. In Brandom's system, perception plays a crucial but limited role. It serves as one important source of non-inferential entry moves into the Göker.
Non-inferential entry moves, meaning?
Meaning ways to gain entitlement to a claim without having to infer it from other beliefs. A reliable observer, for instance, is typically entitled to the commitment, "this is red," simply by virtue of seeing a red thing in good light. They don't usually have to reason their way to that judgment. The perception itself provides the entitlement. This accounts for the empirical dimension of our knowledge, how we gather information from the world.
Okay, so perception gets us started. It gives us data points for the game.
Yes, but, and this is absolutely critical, the conceptual content of the judgment, "this is red," is not simply the private, ineffable sensation of redness you might have. Its public, shareable content is determined by its public inferential role in the Göker. To be committed to this is red is to be committed to this is colored, to be precluded from being simultaneously entitled to this is green all over, and maybe to have a reason for actions like stopping at a traffic light or picking a ripe tomato.
So the meaning isn't the private feeling, it's the public rules of use.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that Protagoras' thesis, properly understood through this Brandomian lens, is about the social institution of these inferential norms that govern our public judgments, including those based on perception. These norms are what allow us to share, debate, and justify empirical claims in the first place. By reducing Protagoras' thesis to a claim about private, fleeting perception, Plato attacks a straw man. He focuses attention on the entry point into the game, perception, while completely ignoring the sophisticated structure and rules of the game itself, the inferential norms, which is where meaning, reason, and justification actually reside according to this view.
That really illustrates how a clever mischaracterization focusing on the weakest link or reframing the whole argument can distort an entire philosophical position. It definitely makes you question where we should locate the truth or meaning of our observations in the raw input or in the shared system we use to make sense of it.
It shifts the whole ground of the debate.
Okay, this brings us squarely into the modern era and the ongoing relevance of Protagoras. He is still, so often, just dismissed as a radical subjectivist, right? A figure whose ideas inevitably lead to moral nihilism and epistemological skepticism, basically an anything goes philosophy that undermines any claim to real knowledge or shared values. But our Brandomian reconstruction paints a very, very different picture, a picture that might be surprisingly relevant today.
That modern dismissal, just like Plato's ancient critique, really rests on the same fundamental misinterpretation. The assumption that the measure in homo mensura refers to the isolated, private, individual consciousness. The Brandomian alternative, as we've been hammering home, posits that the measure is in fact the set of public social norms implicit in a community's linguistic practices, the rules of the Gogar. An individual's belief is true, or, maybe more accurately put, a commitment to which they are genuinely entitled. Not because of some private, incorrigible feeling of certainty inside their head, but because it can be successfully defended within the public space of reasons, according to these shared intersubjective norms. Norms that are established and maintained through our ongoing interactions.
Think of science again.
Yeah, think of a scientific theory. It's considered true or justified, not because one scientist had a private aha moment, though that might happen, but because the theory, the claim, withstands rigorous peer review, experimentation, public debate, and coheres with other accepted theories, all processes governed by shared public norms of inquiry.
So the individual is actually constrained by the community's norms. They're not just a law unto themselves, even if they are somehow the measure. This isn't just arbitrary group agreement then.
Precisely. The individual is not some autonomous creator of truth out of thin air. They are a participant in a shared practice that necessarily constrains them. To use a concept correctly, to make a justifiable claim, means abiding by the inferential rules that govern its use within the community. Now, you could call this a form of social conventionalism. Sure, our norms arise from our practices, but it's a very special kind, far from arbitrary. What's fascinating here is that these conventions, these norms of reasoning and justification, are not like, say, traffic laws that we could just arbitrarily decide to change overnight. Drive on the right versus left. These inferential norms are the very structures that constitute rationality itself. They're what make meaningful thought, communication, and even individual self-consciousness possible in the first place. Without these shared binding norms, we couldn't even think coherent thoughts, let alone communicate them or hold each other responsible.
So Protagoras, in this light, isn't an individualist at all.
Quite the opposite. He emerges as a profound communalist, someone who understood, perhaps implicitly, that our capacity to think and reason is fundamentally a social achievement. It's a gift, you might say, of our shared linguistic practices, something we do together. This offers a powerful counter-narrative to the kind of extreme individualism sometimes prevalent today. It suggests that our capacity for thought, our very minds, are deeply, inextricably woven into our social fabric.
Wow. This social understanding of reason and truth sounds like it could have really profound implications for how we organize our society, especially thinking about democracy. What does this new Protagoras mean for the polis, the ancient Greek city-state where democracy first emerged, and maybe by extension for our modern democracies too?
This connection is actually hinted at, maybe allegorically, right there in Plato's dialogue, Protagoras. In that dialogue, Protagoras tells a famous myth to explain why virtue, or political skill, politike techna, can be taught to everyone, unlike specialized crafts. In this myth, Zeus, fearing for humanity's extinction because they couldn't live together peacefully despite having technical skills, like building houses, sent Hermes down to distribute two crucial qualities: diko, justice, and agius, respect or shame, to all citizens, not just to a select few specialists.
Why of everyone?
Because, Zeus declared through Hermes, these qualities are absolutely necessary for the very existence and survival of the city. Without them, no community could hold together.
Okay, and how does this ancient myth relate back to Brandom's very modern-sounding Gogar, the game of giving and asking for reasons?
Well, the myth can be read as a really profound narrative expression of the essential preconditions for the Gogar, translated into political and ethical terms. Justice, dika, can be seen as representing the fundamental requirement to provide reasons for one's claims and actions, and to abide by the inferential commitments one undertakes in public life. It's the expectation that your actions and pronouncements are justifiable within the community's shared norms. And respect, big use. That looks like the reciprocal recognition of others as fellow players in the game. Recognizing that their challenges must be met with reasons, that their perspectives are initially valid points of view within the game, and that their authority to hold one accountable must be acknowledged.
So they're like the entry requirements for playing the game of democracy.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these qualities, these capacities, are distributed to all citizens in the myth precisely because anyone who can speak, anyone who can potentially participate in the social practice of reason-giving is, by definition, a potential player in this game. They are endowed, by their nature as linguistic beings, with the basic capacity to engage in rational public discourse.
So democratic deliberation itself is essentially this game in action, a political manifestation of the Gogar.
Absolutely. That's a key implication.
Yeah.
Democratic deliberation is, at its core, the political instantiation of the Gogar. It is the process by which the polis, the ancient city-state, or by analogy, a modern nation, collectively engages in deontic scorekeeping regarding its shared commitments, goals, and actions. Laws and public policies viewed through this lens are not primarily attempts to approximate some transcendent, pre-existing form of the good or justice, accessible only to an elite few philosopher kings, as Plato envisioned.
So what are they then?
Instead, they are the explicit articulations of the community's current commitments, arrived at through the messy, ongoing, public process of argumentation, justification, negotiation, and persuasion, precisely the skills Protagoras claimed to teach. When a society debates a law or a budget or a foreign policy decision, it's engaging in a collective game of giving and asking for reasons, trying to build and maintain a coherent and functionally effective web of shared commitments.
So Protagoras' philosophy, reconstructed via Brandom, actually offers a defense of democracy.
Yes, a robust, non-foundationalist defense of democracy. It suggests democracy is the form of political life most congruent with the social structure of rationality itself. It's the political system that best reflects our nature as beings who constitute their world through reasoned, accountable dialogue.
That provides a really deep philosophical justification for democratic processes, doesn't it? Seeing them not just as a way to count votes, but as the collective playing out of our fundamental rational capacity to build a shared world together.
It grounds democracy in our very nature as linguistic, reason-giving beings.
Okay, to try and bring all these fascinating, complex threads together, let's summarize the two competing philosophical paradigms we've been contrasting throughout this discussion. The traditional Platonic view versus our reconstructed Protagoras, heavily informed by Brandom. It really is a stark contrast, highlighting two entirely different ways of understanding knowledge, truth, reality, and even what it means to be human.
It truly is a fundamental divergence in worldviews, a clash of paradigms. Let's try to compare them systematically across some of those key philosophical concepts we've touched on. First, let's take meaning. For the Platonic, or more broadly, the representationalist paradigm, meaning is primarily about reference. A word or concept gets its meaning by accurately representing or corresponding to some object, property, or maybe a transcendent form out there in reality.
Word points to...
Basically, yeah. For the Protagorean Brandomian paradigm, however, meaning is fundamentally about inference. A concept's meaning is its role in a web of reasons, what it implies, what implies it, what it's incompatible with, its functional role in the game. Next up, truth. For Plato, truth is correspondence. A statement is true if it accurately mirrors or corresponds to a state of affairs in a mind-independent reality, like those eternal forms. Truth is about getting the picture right.
Matching the world.
Right. For our reconstructed Protagoras, truth is better understood as a normative status. Using the word true is a way to endorse a claim, to mark it as a commitment one is currently entitled to within the public. Social game of giving and asking for reasons. It's a marker of justification within the practice. Then let's consider objectivity. In the Platonic view, objectivity means mind independence. What is objectively correct is determined by a reality that exists completely separate from and transcends human minds, practices, and perspectives.
Getting beyond the human viewpoint.
Exactly. For the Brandomian Protagoras, objectivity is conceived as a social-perspectival achievement. What counts as objectively correct emerges from the dynamic structure of mutual accountability and responsibility that's inherent in the social practice of reason-giving itself. It's built between perspectives, not beyond them. How about reason itself? Plato saw reason primarily as theoretical intellect. Who knows? The capacity of the soul to grasp eternal, unchanging principles and abstract forms, hopefully escaping the confusion of the senses.
Sure thought.
Right. For our reconstructed Protagoras, reason is understood more as a practical skill, specifically, the practical mastery of navigating the complex, social, and normative game of giving and asking for reasons, the skill of adeptly managing commitments and entitlements in discourse. And this leads naturally to entirely different understandings of the expert or the wise person. Plato's expert is the philosopher, the rare individual who has, through rigorous intellectual training and perhaps divine insight, escaped the cave of sensory experience and social convention to gain direct knowledge of the true reality, the forms.
The one who sees the light.
Yes. Protagoras' expert, on the other hand, is the master scorekeeper, the sophist. This is the person who possesses a superior practical grasp of the community's inferential norms and can skillfully help improve the coherence, stability, and practical utility of both individual and collective belief systems. And finally, this difference plays out in political justification. For Plato, political justification is foundationalist. Just laws and institutions are those that correctly instantiate or approximate the transcendent form of justice, which can only be truly known by that philosophical elite, the philosopher kings.
Top down from the forms.
Right. For the Brandomian Protagoras, political justification is pragmatist and coherentist. Just laws and policies are those that are properly entitled by the community's current web of commitments, arrived at and continuously refined through open, inclusive, democratic deliberation and public justification, the Gojurar played out in the political sphere.
What's really fascinating here, looking at that comparison, is that this table doesn't just show minor differences in opinion. It reveals two fundamentally incommensurable ways of seeing the world, doesn't it? Each starting point seems to lead to profoundly different answers for almost every philosophical question you can imagine, from ethics to epistemology to politics.
Absolutely. They represent two distinct paradigms for understanding our relationship to meaning, truth, and each other.
It provides a really clear, concise way to consolidate the major themes of our discussion today and really solidify, for you, the listener, your understanding of this incredible paradigm shift we've been exploring. Hashtag, tag, outro. Well, we have covered a truly immense amount of ground today, haven't we? Journeying all the way from ancient Greece to the intricacies of modern analytic philosophy, all in an effort to perhaps give Protagoras a new, more powerful voice. We set out with three core aims, really. First, to reinterpret that famous homo mensura thesis not as individual subjectivism, but as a foundational statement of social pragmatism. Second, to demonstrate that this reinterpreted thesis can actually systematically rebut Plato's canonical critiques, showing maybe they were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the game Protagoras was playing. And third, to offer a robust alternative to the modern dismissal of Protagoras as just a simple, maybe even dangerous relativist.
And in doing so, the new Protagoras who emerges from this reconstruction is, we hope, not Plato's easily defeated interlocutor, not just some peddler of rhetorical tricks and self-refuting relativism. He is instead potentially the originator, or at least an early pioneer, of a powerful and coherent counter-tradition in Western philosophy, a path that fundamentally emphasizes human practice, social interaction, and the public shared nature of reason itself.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this reconstructed Protagoras feels like a strikingly modern figure, doesn't he? A kind of proto-pragmatist who understood, perhaps intuitively, that meaning, knowledge, and even objectivity are not things we simply discover ready-made in a world independent of us. Rather, they are statuses that are instituted in achievements that are secured through what we do together as social, linguistic, and rational beings.
That's right. His true legacy, we might argue, shouldn't be solely defined by the brilliant but perhaps biased caricature crafted by his most formidable opponent, Plato. Maybe it should be defined by his profound, early insight into placing human practice, the shared norm-governed activity of a community, at the very center of philosophical inquiry.
It makes you wonder, perhaps the crisis of relativism that has preoccupied Western thought on and off from Plato's time right up to our own, maybe that's actually a misdiagnosed ailment.
That's a provocative thought. The deeply rooted fear that grounding norms and truth in human attitudes or practices must inevitably lead to chaos or nihilism, arguably. That fear itself might be a symptom of the representationalist paradigm's own limitations. Its inability to imagine a robust alternative where objectivity arises from practice, not in opposition to it. The true philosophical challenge may be first powerfully articulated by Protagoras, and then given its most sophisticated contemporary articulation by philosophers like Robert Brandom, isn't necessarily escaping our inherently human social perspective in some futile search for an inhuman, absolute objectivity outside the game. It is rather perhaps to fully understand, and then to take profound responsibility for, the normative practices through which we collectively constitute our shared world and, in doing so, constitute ourselves as rational, accountable beings.
So, considering all we've discussed today, this radical idea that truth and meaning might be fundamentally forged in our social practices, in our shared game of giving and asking for reasons rather than simply discovered out there in some external pre-given reality, what implications does this have for how you, our listener, approach truth, disagreement, and community in your own life? Does reframing things this way change how you listen to others, how you argue or justify your own beliefs? Does it shift, even slightly, how you define what is real and how you participate in building a shared reality with the people around you? Something to think about. We definitely encourage you to seek out the original sources mentioned, Plato's dialogues, maybe even dive into Brandom if you're feeling adventurous, and continue your own philosophical exploration. Thank you for joining us on AI History of Western Philosophy.